Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for December 6th, 2017. On today's show, we have a bunch of news, including the Gotti biopic controversy, a Slaughterhouse-Five TV series, a WarGame TV series reboot, Disney's The Little Mermaid live-action film gets a director, and the first reactions to Paul Thomas Anderson's The Phantom Thread. And in our feature presentation, we'll be taking a look at the pros and cons of Disney's potential acquisition of Fox. This is Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is a panel of most of Slash Film's regular staff, and that includes Slash Film managing editor Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
And Slash Film senior writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And Slash Film writers Chris Evangelista.
Hi.
And Hoai-Tran.
Hey everyone!
I think Chris is doing that because one of our readers seemed to like to get pleasure out of the way he normally chimes in the beginning of the podcast. So yes. So okay. First up in the news, Disney's The Little Mermaid live action quote unquote remake has found a director. Ben, what do we know?
Well, we think it's found a director. An offer has gone out to a director, and that director is Rob Marshall, who is the guy who directed Chicago, Memoirs of a Geisha, and Nine. And Disney has reportedly sent out an offer for him to direct the Little Mermaid live-action adaptation. We don't know who's going to star in this movie yet, but we do know, excuse me, that Hamilton and Moana's Lin-Manuel Miranda and Disney legend Alan Menken are going to be providing music for the film. So Rob Marshall, this is another case of Disney sort of keeping things in the family. Marshall has directed Pirates of the Caribbean, On Stranger Tides, Into the Woods, and he's currently in post-production on Mary Poppins Returns, which I think the idea that Marshall is being offered this film sort of bodes well for how Disney thinks about, Mary Poppins Returns and how well that's going so far. So that's good news, I guess. I'm not crazy about Rob Marshall as a director, and I feel like this would be a good example for or opportunity for Disney to offer, a female filmmaker a big, blockbuster movie that's well positioned to make a lot of money and be successful and potentially launch somebody's career in a bigger way or to the next level. But yeah, it looks like they're sticking with the familiar on this one.
Is anybody on this podcast a fan of Rob Marshall? I take that as a no. It just seems weird to me that, there's a couple, there's like a few select guys that do movie musicals, and it seems like they get all the movie musical jobs. Like, why when there's a movie musical, why can't they try someone outside of that, small box?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess there's a lot of moving parts there, and studios are famously risk averse, so they're probably. I mean, I understand the mentality of wanting to go with somebody familiar and somebody who's sort of been there before and done this before, but at the same time, like this is a great opportunity to sort of spread the wealth a little bit. I don't know. I'm a little disappointed in this choice. And again, this offer has gone out. Marshall has not accepted it yet. Apparently, he's going to wait until after the holidays to decide one way or the other. So stay tuned.
And also in the news, there's some controversy going on about the Gotti biopic starring John Travolta. It was supposed to be coming out in 10 days, and it seems like it needs a new distributor. HT, what do we know?
So Lionsgate has reportedly canceled the release date for Gotti, which was supposed to come out on December 15th. And that's the mob movie starring John Travolta as the infamous head of the Gambino crime family set during the 80s. And
by the way,
Lionsgate,
we all write about movies for a living. Did any of us know that this movie was coming out in 10 days?
I did not.
I think I saw a trailer but didn't realize that the release date. I saw a trailer because it aired online. I've never seen one, on TV or in front of a real movie at a real movie theater or anything like that.
Yeah, I didn't think this movie existed. But go on, HT. I'm sorry.
It's okay. So we heard that the studio sold the film back to its producers at Emmett Furla and Oasis Films, and that it was being shopped around to distributors and was probably going to come out in 2018 instead of 2017. But shortly after that news broke, John Travolta released a statement saying that Lionsgate did not drop the release per se, but he was unhappy that Lionsgate was giving it such a limited release, and he thought that it deserved a wider one. So he teamed up with a new financier, Edward Walson, and he is working with him to look for a new theatrical distributor and hopefully get the film a bigger release because he thinks that his performance deserves more of an audience. That's in his words, actually, in his so many words that he said to Deadline. So it seems like the 2017 release was to sort of get the film in the Oscar competition race and maybe get John Travolta a bid in the acting nominations because he had made a good impression with the People versus OJ American Crime Story. So I think he was hoping to sort of continue a career reinvigoration with Gotti. But I guess that won't happen now that it's going to be coming out in 2018. And maybe this will make Travolta happy, actually.
And also in the news, Slaughterhouse-Five, the TV series, is in the works from Happy showrunner. Jacob, you wrote the story up for the site. What do we know?
Well, what we do know is that Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, which, for the record, is my favorite book of all time, so I take this very personally, is being adapted into a TV series by Universal Cable Productions. There is no network attached, but Patrick McManus, one of the showrunners on Sci-Fi's new series Happy, as well as Netflix's late Marco Polo, is writing and executive producing the series. And Slaughterhouse-Five, a lot of people have read it in high school or forced to read it in high school, which is not the way to read Slaughterhouse-Five. It's a really amazing book. The basic gist of it is that it's a science fiction satire. It's also an anti-war drama. It's based on Kurt Vonnegut's actual experiences during World War II, where he survived the firebombing of Dresden. But the book follows Billy Pilgrim, who becomes unstuck in time, and his life begins occurring out of order. So the book flashes between the end of his life, beginning of his life, and all events in the middle, and he has no control over the order of his life. So it's him living an unhappy marriage in New York, him fighting in World War II, him being a captive of alien creatures in an alien zoo in the distant future. It just jumps between all these really insane locations, and it's Vonnegut, so it's very humanist, it's very personal, it's very raw. It's all about finding, trying to find hope in the darkness, and oftentimes failing, but trying to hope anyway, which is kind of the Vonnegut way of life, and one that I prescribe to. And what we don't know is exactly how you turn a book that's about 275 pages into a ongoing TV show. This isn't Game of Thrones, where there is many books to draw from, even Lord of the Rings, which has all those appendices and histories to transform. It's a one-and-done book. It's a very clear beginning and end. It makes its point and it's done. But McManus has a quote for Variety where he says that they're planning to take all the small suggestions and small details in the book and expand them and rebuild the world into a larger series, which makes you think that we're going to see something like Man in the High Castle on Amazon, which takes Philip K. Dick's work and kind of runs with it. Doesn't really adapt the book as much as it takes that initial foundation and builds its own thing, which as a Vonnegut fan, I'm like tapping my toe, kind of irritated. But as somebody who likes good sci-fi television, I mean, there's a foundation there. Am I the only one here who's read Slaughterhouse-Five? I want to hear other people's opinion on this.
I have not read it, but this sounds like a fascinating construct to tell a story. And I would agree with you. I'm betting that they're going to be running with the idea of maybe the main character and some of the ideas of it, but like really kind of that format is probably going to take center stage. Has anybody else on this podcast read the book?
I have not.
I have not either.
I have. It's great. I don't know if it'll work as a TV show. I guess we'll see. I think they're going to approach this the way they made that Minority Report show, where it's set within the world that the book established and sort of going to run with it. But that's just my guess.
And it worked out so well for that Minority Report show.
Yes, everyone's about it.
Yeah. And speaking of that, let's talk about another TV series reboot. They're rebooting the 80s classic. Is it a classic? I consider it a classic. WarGames as a TV series. Hackers are all the rage nowadays because, everything's getting hacked, and Mr. Robot is big on, TV. HT, you wrote this up for the site. There was a trailer. What do we know about this new series?
Not much, really. So I'm going to call it a classic film because I have a soft spot in my heart for the original War Games starring Matthew Broderick and his floppy-haired goodness. So the new War Games reboot will be as an experimental interactive series that will be shown on the web, the internet, appropriately, because it will be mostly about modern espionage, hacking, and government conspiracy. So your daily 2017 life, essentially. So the series is created by MGM and the interactive video company Echo with the Her Story creator Sam Barlow. Her Story was an acclaimed web series that kind of followed the same format. It was told exclusively through fictional police camera footage or police interview footage, and was explored women's sort of trials and tribulations and how they try to tell their perspectives. So the War Games reboot will kind of follow along those lines in that you will be watching through several windows on your screen, and each window shows like a different hacker or a different person who's in this world. And you can follow a specific character, and you'll be able to interact with them as well. It's kind of sort of the same premise as Unfriended, that indie horror film that took place exclusively in a video chat room. So the new War Games will take place somewhat like that. Otherwise, we don't really know much about it. The teaser is incredibly cryptic and dark, but it does give me, like you said, shades of Mr. Robot. It mentions a lot of the real world hacks, like the Sony hack, the Equifax security breach. So it seems like a very timely series.
Yeah, the trailer kind of sets up the timeliness, and nowadays it's much more believable that someone could actually hack into the government than it probably was, back when War Games actually came out. And I know they made some direct-to-DVD sequels that were horrible. I'm kind of sad that they aren't going to make a full go at actually making a feature film version of this. But does anybody else there, Ben? Do you have any feelings on the format of this show?
I really like the original War Games, and this sounds kind of interesting to me. I've heard really good things about Her Story. I've never played, or is it like a game or a web series? I'm not really sure where the line is drawn there, but
it's a game because I think it's through Microsoft, but it's also sort of like a movie in a way.
Yeah,
it's 6 episodes long.
Yeah, so
I can explain Her Story if you want that real quick.
Yeah, I mean, HT sort of ran down the basic part of it, but go ahead.
Well, Her Story is this really interesting interactive game where the basic gist of it is you're looking at a bunch of video files, and there's no direct story, there's no direct narrative. You start searching the files. You can search for any phrases that appear in the dialogue. You can search for any key words, and you just start watching all these random video clips, and you eventually find the story. It's like a 4 to maybe 5 hour experience, and it's all live action footage shot for the game, but there's no actual branching narrative. It's up to you to kind of solve a mystery. It's very much more a game than it is a movie or a TV series. So it's a very interesting thing. I wouldn't call it a great game, but it's a very interesting game. And I don't know if that's a new genre or not, but it's certainly something that's worth thinking about and talking about.
Yeah, it does seem like this interactive experiences we talked about the other day. Ben was talking about, what was that? Mosaic, yeah. So it seems like there's more of these. It's just interesting, from War Games, I kind of want, some action, and this trailer kind of shows some people in front of their computers, and I assume that it's going to be cheaply made with, webcams, like, HT says, and it looks very, much like, those original web series, like Lonely Girl, if you remember that. It kind of brings to mind, and I don't know, I don't think that's pushing what we can do with this medium. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll have to see. Moving on to our last bit of news, the first reactions to Paul Thomas Anderson's Phantom Thread have hit the web. I saw the film. Has anybody else here seen Phantom Thread?
Chris has.
Yes, I have. Sorry. I
Yes.
did.
I'll give you my reaction first because my reaction is probably going to be the most negative. And that is that it is perverse. It's about kind of the compromises you make in a relationship. The acting is incredible. The score by Johnny Greenwood is fantastic. The production design is exquisite. But in the end, which by the way, I really hate the end of this movie. You'll see when you see it. In the end, it's not a movie for my tastes. And I'm kind of left wanting, more of the older Paul Thomas Anderson movies. But I think people are going to love this. So, Chris, what did you think of this movie?
I loved it. I love the ending too. I'm surprised you didn't like the ending. The ending actually was one of my favorite parts because it took me completely by surprise. And that's all I'll say. I won't give anything away. But it was a lot funnier than I thought it was going to be. This is basically a very dark comedy, and that's not how it's being sold at all. The trailers make it look like this sort of like stuffy costume drama, and that's really not what it is. It's a lot funnier. It's a lot darker than the trailers are letting on, but I'll have more to say in my review on slashfilm.com, which will probably be up tomorrow. So look for that, everyone.
And HT, you did a roundup of the reactions. Where are people falling on this film?
It's basically universal praise. I think that everyone is universal in their praise, at least of Daniel Day-Lewis, of newcomer Vicky Krieps. I think that's how you say your name. And they're calling this one of Paul Thomas Anderson's masterpieces. So it's definitely up there with his great streak of films. I don't think he's had a real bad film yet, although I guess we've had this debate before on our podcast. But like you said, Chris, my impression of it was that it was a stuffy period piece, but there are a lot of critics calling it perverse, kinky, a gothic romance, definitely something that's a big 180 than what you'd expect from the trailers. So I've seen the word perverse thrown around about 3 times by 3 critics, so that was really exciting for me. Yeah. So it's a lot of people have been comparing it to Mother in sort of the themes that it follows about relationships and the sacrifices for the relationships, like you said. It's been on at least 4 or 5 year-end best of 2017 lists, so it's definitely a film that you should not miss. I will read a couple of the samples of people's reactions to it. So this is from the New York Times. 2 lives and 2 perversities become one in this ravishingly beautiful, often unexpectedly funny film, which traces the relationship between an eminent couture designer and his younger surprising muse. It's a story about love and about work, and finally as much about its own creation as the romance on screen. And that is basically the gist of every other reaction to it.
Yeah, I don't think you have to read anymore. I think people probably get the idea. This is going to be a long show, so we should probably get right into our feature presentation, which is talking about this potential Disney Fox acquisition. We've been talking in the past on the site and on the podcast about Disney's plans to acquire assets from 21st Century Fox, which includes movies, TV shows, possibly even the 20th Century Fox brand. And we've given our first reactions to that when that news first hit. The talks are back on. Some people seem to think it could happen by the end of this week. The acquisition could actually go through. But I guess I wanted to, on the site, we came together and wrote this fantastic group article kind of weighing the pros and the cons of this potential acquisition. And I wanted to bring this to the podcast. So I guess let's start with one of the positive. HT,
So the biggest positive that people have been trotting out for this Disney 20th Century Fox merger is that the X-Men and Fantastic Four characters who are under 20th Century Fox after Marvel sold the movie rights to their characters in the 90s could finally join the MCU. So this has been a source of frustration for many fans of the Avengers and X-Men and Fantastic Four who want to see their favorite characters on the big screen, and of confusion for general audiences who have to deal with two Quicksilvers, for example. So it's an exciting prospect and would definitely expand the Marvel universe beyond anything we could have imagined. And who knows where it could go after in Avengers 4 too. So this could be a new chance to start with to put in more X-Men and put in more Fantastic Four and finally maybe get a good Fantastic Four movie.
Almost all the positive that I've been seeing online has been basically superhero related, which, I mean, look, there's nothing wrong with superhero movies, but there's more to movies than superhero movies. That said, Fox just recently started sort of stepping outside their comfort zone and making darker, more challenging superhero movies, especially with like a film like Logan, which is really not like anything that's in Disney's MCU at all. And I kind of have a feeling that if Disney buys Fox, they're not going to want to make movies like that. Disney doesn't really want to go that dark. They want to make films for everyone because that's the best way to make the most money. So it just seems like just when we're finally getting started with superhero movies stepping out of their comfort zone, they might step right back into it.
And, that's not the last of the superhero discussion. Jacob has a little bit to add.
This is actually a really small niche thing. It's actually almost silly, but I think it's worth bringing up. That is, ever since the Marvel movies released by Disney started becoming increasingly successful, you started noticing that the X-Men and Fantastic Four characters started being pushed to the sidelines in the comics. Like the Fantastic Four was disbanded. The X-Men essentially have their own pocket universe in the comics. They don't interact with the main cast of the Marvel universe. Like you don't see them at all. And taking their place has been the Inhumans. And if you read up on this, a lot of this has to do with the fact that the people holding the purse strings at Marvel are the people saying, why should we release comic books that are an advertisement for our competitors' movies? Which is misunderstanding what comic books are, but that's the reading that people are having on this. And so the Inhumans have been pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed in the comics. Everywhere there be an X-Man normally, there's an Inhuman now. And that led to the Inhumans TV show that premiered a few months ago that nobody watched and is a disaster. And if Disney has the X-Men again, it has the weird ripple effect of, we can allow the X-Men and Fantastic Four back in our comics. So even though they originate in the comics and are a vital building block for this entire comic book universe, it won't be until they're actually being made into Disney movies again that comic fans can actually see these characters treated with respect. And the Inhumans kind of put back in the background where they belong, because over the past 5 years, I've read so many bad Inhuman comics that were attempting to sort of relaunch them as the new X-Men. So like I said, a little thing, it's a nerdy thing, and there are things on this list that matter a whole lot more, but it's something to think about.
And as we said, superhero films are not the whole thing here. They're also, acquiring a library of TV shows, past, present, and future. Ben, you have a thought on the TV show side of things.
Yeah, sort of similarly to what Chris was talking about with the potential loss of, audacious R-rated superhero movies, could come a similar loss to sort of edgy, more mature TV shows. So the specific details of this acquisition are still not entirely clear, but earlier reports have suggested that maybe TV brands like FX and FXX could also be transferred over to Disney in this sale. So if that happens, I can't imagine that Disney would be okay with something like American Horror Story or Legion airing on one of its networks. For the same reasons that Chris mentioned, they're very much using a shotgun blast approach to reaching as wide an audience as possible. And the idea of these very specific sort of edgy and mature shows does not strike me like something that that Disney would be interested in keeping on board.
And obviously, Fox is looking to get rid of a lot of things, but one of the two of those things that they're looking to keep are the news and sports. And you also think that there's a negative to that.
Right, yeah. So this whole thing, this deal is estimated at a value of like $60 billion. So that's how much Disney would be paying Fox for the movie studio, some of these TV assets, things like this. So the problem with that I see is that would basically mean that Fox, who has, as you just said, is definitely interested in putting more of a focus on news and sports, is going to be investing that $60 billion in news. And that means Fox News. And as we all know, I mean, I don't need to get into what Fox News is and does, but anyone listening to this knows, I'm sure, that their coverage is like wildly skewed, and I'll just leave it at that. But just the idea
Ben, they're fair and balanced. They're fair and balanced, Ben.
The idea of the people behind Fox News having $60 billion more to pump into promoting and whatever their bizarre slant on reality is pretty terrifying to me, especially with what's going on right now and how we have other elections coming up soon. And if people aren't informed, then they can't make proper decisions. So it's a scary thing.
One thing I haven't seen really any article talk about is the Hulu aspect of this, because you might not know, but Hulu was started by a bunch of major companies, one of which is Disney, who owns a 30% stake in Hulu. Fox owns a 30% stake in Hulu. So with Disney purchasing Fox, they could essentially own 60% of Hulu. What does that mean for the future of Hulu? I don't know. Obviously Disney wants to start their own premium streaming service, so you would think that they wouldn't need Hulu, but maybe they want to, keep, there's I think Hulu is making revenues of over $1 billion, so maybe there's some money to be made there, and maybe they want to keep, the last few episodes of the latest network TV shows on there for people to see ads and make money. So it might not be the death of Hulu. And the other thought I had is maybe Disney is acquiring this so that they could basically use the technology that has gone into Hulu. If you think about this, Hulu has been around for almost the last decade, and the technology that has gone into that streaming service, it has been able to handle a demand like any other, like no other streaming service. And I'm sure if Disney is making their own streaming service, they could use the bones of that for their own purposes. So maybe there's that. So it's unclear how Hulu will figure into this equation. But moving on from Hulu, let's talk about Fox movies and shows on Disney's upcoming streaming service. Ben, you have some thoughts on this?
Sort of along those same lines, if they were to acquire Fox and all of the properties that we assume would come along with that, the library of Fox's entire archive, that would definitely increase the value, make it a better value for consumers who choose to subscribe to their upcoming streaming service. So we talked on a recent episode of Slash Film Daily about how many streaming services are too many and what they would have to do to get us to subscribe. And I know that a live action Star Wars TV series is probably enough to convince a lot of people. But for anyone who happens to be, still on the fence about that, the notion of being able to access not only Disney's whole back catalog, but also Fox's definitely, makes a better deal and might be enough to sort of move the needle for Disney on getting people to sign up for that subscription service.
Now let's go from TV back to the movie theater. Disney already has too many movies to promote. Well, what is owning another studio going to do to this equation, Ben?
Yeah, so that's one of the big things that I am a little worried about. I feel like Disney already has Lucasfilm, Marvel, and Pixar to contend with, plus their own sort of Walt Disney Studios or Walt Disney Pictures releases. So there's a lot to put out over the course of a calendar year. And I feel like Disney is already sort of fighting with themselves on some of these release dates with, like, I think the release date for the new Indiana Jones movie got moved because some other competing Disney movie was coming out around that time or something. So the thought is that Disney wouldn't want to release multiple movies that it owns in the same window, because that theoretically they could cannibalize the box office, and each individual movie would not make as much money. So if you take all of the movies that Disney is already releasing and then add all of the ones that Fox would be bringing to the table as well, Fox I think released 14 movies this year, or will by the time the end of the year is done. That's a lot of movies, and it's just a really, really crowded calendar. And I'm worried that Disney is going to just start cutting down on the number of projects that they greenlight as a whole, because they have so much stuff to get out there to people, and not enough calendar months to do it.
And we know Disney is all about these big budget, epic event films. Chris, could this pose a problem to mid-budget films?
Yeah, I think it could. There was a time when Hollywood, big Hollywood studios were fine releasing lots and lots of mid-budget films. I mean, a great example is The Exorcist. That movie cost like $11 million to make, which is nothing compared to, what people spend on movies now. And, there are still, a few mid-budget movies, but more and more, it seems like everything that comes out now is a big event film. Everything has to be a big event. And Disney certainly doesn't seem to have any interest in making smaller movies right now. So if they purchase Fox, I really doubt they're going to want to use that brand to, make even smaller films. They're going to want a return on that investment. And so they're just going to need to either go big or go home.
I'm trying to be more optimistic here. I know that's a negative, but I would honestly believe that Disney isn't buying 20th Century Fox just for their library of films and TV. I would think that they want to, turn that Fox brand into something for them. And I would think that they wouldn't want to, just turn it into another Disney. So I would think that they would more than likely, the Mouse House would want to turn 20th Century Fox into a more adult branded entertainment arm of the company. They could produce content aimed more towards, adults and be outside of that Disney brand. Disney used to do this with Touchstone Pictures. You can remember Wes Anderson, Rushmore, Royal Tenenbaums. His early big films, were released by Disney through Touchstones. So perhaps, maybe I'm being optimistic here, but perhaps Disney could use Fox to release more low and mid-budget films, allowing for more interesting non-franchise films. Looking at that release calendar, as Ben kind of mentioned, it's clear that Disney is already competing with itself in the big event and franchise film department. It doesn't make much sense for Fox to use Fox for a similar purpose and cannibalize its own audience at the multiplex. So, I kind of like the idea that they would use the studio as a place for interesting stories and new filmmakers to shine, but maybe I am being a little bit optimistic. Another point that came up to me was Disney will finally own full rights to Star Wars: A New Hope. When Disney acquired Lucasfilm, the company bought rights to nearly all of Star Wars, but they were still forced to share distribution rights, creative decisions, and profits with George Lucas's original film Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope with Fox. And if Disney were to acquire Fox, that would mean that the studio would own all of Star Wars for the first time ever. What this would mean is unclear. Some believe that Fox's ownership in A New Hope is a sticking point preventing Disney from releasing the original theatrical cut of the film, the non-special edition. It could mean that the beloved 20th Century Fox fanfare might be restored to the past and future Star Wars films. That could be neat. But I don't know. And the other thing that hit me is in the animation department. Fox has Blue Sky Studios. What is going to happen to Blue Sky Studios is unclear. I would think it's probably going to be a negative. I'm not a fan of Blue Sky Studios films, but, many people love those Ice Age and Rio films. I know the Peanuts movie got some critical acclaim. But Fox owns this animation studio, and if Disney is acquiring that as part of this, which we don't know is the case, they already have Pixar. They already have Walt Disney Animation Studios. They have Disney Toons. are they going to need another animation studio? And you know, in the theme park side of things, I don't want to see you know, Ice Age and Rio rides in Disneyland. Okay, the theme park fan in myself does not want to see that happen. So, but on the other side of the theme park thing, Disney is gaining ownership of Avatar. You know, they just built Pandora, the world of Avatar, in Orlando. There's rumors that they might build one overseas, and now that they own all of Avatar, you know, James Cameron's film franchise, it kind of means that they own that part of, you know, they own all parts of that aspect, which is kind of cool, I guess. On the negative of that, Disney gains ownership of properties already in competing theme parks. So, like, you know, The Simpsons is in Universal theme parks, and if they acquired, you know, the library of The Simpsons cartoons and movies, or movie, you know, they would not be able to bring them to their theme parks, and actually they would have another theme park, you know, a competing theme park using their properties. And, you know, this isn't the first time this has happened to Disney. This happened with Marvel. When they acquired Marvel, Universal owned rights to a lot of the core Marvel characters in their Orlando theme parks, making it impossible for Marvel, or for Disney, to put a lot of the Marvel characters in their theme parks east of the Mississippi. Yeah, east of the Mississippi. So I mean, that is a bit of a problem, but I mean, you know, let's get back to kind of the serious stuff here. And the serious stuff, for the serious stuff, I go to Jacob Hall.
Well, you say serious. I think some people may roll their eyes at this, but it means a lot to me, and I think to people who are big fans of Hollywood history. And that's just a simple fact that 20th Century Fox has been around since 1935. It was there during the early days of Hollywood. It was there in the golden age. It weathered the days of the 60s when everyone thought Hollywood was going to die in the face of television. It was there during the resurgence of the 70s. It's been here through all of this. And the horror stories and tall tales and legends that come out of 20th Century Fox, I mean, it's a bad word to use, but it's magical. Like, I look back at Hollywood history and it's magical to me. It's stuff that I relish and love to learn. And and Peter can talk about this more if he wants to, but the 20th Century Fox lot is one of the more legendary lots in the film industry. And just the thought of all that being absorbed because someone signed some checks, it bums me out. I mean, there's no other better way to put it. It makes me sad to see this piece of Hollywood history, this old school Hollywood studio, the kind of that this couldn't get started today. The kind of thing that only can begin in 1935. Just seeing that possibly get wiped away or absorbed by another studio, it just makes me sad. And I think it makes a lot of people sad. And that's before you get to all the other negatives that we've discussed and we get to. Potential job losses, fewer places to pitch movies. The nostalgic side of me would just be deeply unsettled by something as important and long running and established as this just being gone. But hey, maybe that's silly. I don't know.
We get to our last and most important negative. Let's get to one last positive. HT, what could this possibly mean about in terms of diversity?
So Disney has had a great track record recently with diversity in front of and behind the camera. We've been seeing more stories from Disney and Disney sub studios showcasing stories about diversity, such as Moana, Queen of Cat's-Way, Zootopia, and then we're seeing directors like Ava DuVernay helming huge blockbuster adaptations of A Wrinkle in Time. So we are seeing, and recently at Pixar we saw the authentic Coco, which was a really wonderful sort of a genuine depiction of Mexico and Mexican culture. And Lucasfilm too has been making more of an ostensible outreach towards diversity with really great diverse leads in the Star Wars movies. And of course we've seen Marvel with their their diverse roster of superheroes, even though they don't really have the leads be as diverse as their supporting characters, they still have had a great track record in terms of diversity. So this would be a wonderful sort of turnaround, I guess, since Hollywood has been hit over and over recently with sexual harassment cases and boys club mentality. So if Disney sort of trickles down their diversity efforts, this could mean good things for more flicks in the future.
Just films, but television. But, I hinted before at that one last negative, and this is probably the one that I think occurs to most of us when we think about this potential deal. And that is, Disney is one step closer to becoming a huge monopoly. HT, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so this is the aspect that really unsettles me the most, because now Disney has Marvel, Lucasfilm, Pixar under their belt, and if they'll have 20th Century Fox, that means they'll have a whopping 4 studios, and that will put them with only 4 other competitors in the movie industry, which are Warner Brothers, Paramount, Universal, and Sony, most of which rely on TV for the majority of their revenue. So it's not quite bode well in terms of the variety and of movies that we'll see from various studios in the future. I think about a third of those films will probably be under the Disney wing, essentially. And we've kind of touched on this before with maybe a loss in mid-budget movies, but it also could have more intimidating implications for how Disney will wield that power. So recently we saw, for example, with the LA Times, they published a really incisive investigation into Disney's business practices in their Anaheim, California theme parks. And Disney retaliated by blacklisting LA Times critics out of screenings from all Disney films, which is completely unrelated to the Anaheim story. So after controversy and backlash, they stepped back from that. But we've seen other issues such as Disney strong-arming theaters into giving the company 65% of ticket sales for the Star Wars Last Jedi box office. And, John Lasseter thrived for years in a sort of system that aided his sexual harassment of female employees, or alleged sexual harassment, I'm sorry. So this is only now when Disney has 3 studios under their wing, but what could they be capable of with a third of the movie industry under their jurisdiction?
And I know I mentioned this when we were talking about John Lasseter the other day, but imagine you are a female animator in Hollywood, that wants to work in the United States, and something happened that was bad to you in Disney. Maybe it's not John Lasseter, maybe it's something else, someone in power. Are you going to speak up now that they, already they own Pixar, Walt Disney Animation, Disney Toons, but then they own Blue Sky Animation? There's no place for you to go. It's kind of a scary situation to be in. And still no one has come up on record to talk about, to say anything against John Lasseter. It's all been kind of off the record comments that people have been publishing, which is, scary in itself that, that we can't find anybody to go on record, or that big newspapers can't find anybody to go on record. Does anybody else have any other final thoughts on this whole acquisition talk?
I think we covered it.
Yeah, I think we covered pretty fully. Lastly, at the end of the podcast, I like to, have everybody say where they can find you, but there's just too many people on this podcast to do that today. So, go to slashfilm.com. You can find all of our work on Slashfilm. You can find the articles we wrote on Slashfilm. This whole piece about the pros and cons of the potential Disney Fox acquisition. We have a whole piece on this on slashfilm.com. So, share that with your friends. It has more than what we got to hear in that piece. And it really, has writing from almost all of the Slashfilm staff, minus Bradford Oman. Check that out. You can find this podcast published every weekday on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, all the popular podcast apps. Go to iTunes, give us a rating, give us a review. That helps us out. Spread the word on social media. Spread that, take that article about Disney and Fox and, send it to your friends. That helps us out quite a bit, and we will see you tomorrow.